Podcasters Roundtable, round 33, open mic. So here we go. We're experimenting with the format. Something that I really like to do with Podcasters Roundtable is to think of new ideas and bring them here to the roundtable, mix it up, have some fun, see what works, see what doesn't. And we've had podcasting pet peeves, which we've had more than one of. It was a popular episode, at least in terms of the way it was viewed or downloaded and viewed. We have a podcast and the live version, as well as all this is on the YouTube channel. Go to podcastersroundtable.com to subscribe via your favorite consumption, I won't say device, but method, I guess, your favorite consumption device. So get over there. And if you have a free moment, you happen to be on iTunes or Stitcher these days, it matters. Reviews and ratings, always appreciated. So here we are. We're doing open mic. Maybe this will be the first, kind of like pet peeves. Maybe we'll do more of them. We'll find out. But the concept here is to start off with a topic, any topic. I've got one picked out already, just for sake of ease. And it was going to be just myself, Daniel, and Dave, but Jeremy asked a question ahead of time. That's one of the very cool things here at Podcasters Roundtable. The event is announced. If you're on the email list, you'll get notified. If you circle one of us on Google+, you might be notified, but you'll get the event page, and you can comment and submit stuff ahead of time. And oftentimes that directs traffic through the first, I would say, half of the show, and then we can break off and get some of the real-time comments and questions answered. And that's what we're doing. We got Jeremy, who we will introduce you to here in a second, and then we will start with his topic. And Daniel, we got... All right. Here's what's fun about doing live. If you don't know, if you've never done a Google Hangout on air, you get a private chat with the people who were on the roundtable, as well, or on the Google Hangout on air, as well as a public chat. And so when someone sends you a chat, it's kind of fun because you can say, hey, I'm having this issue. So anyways, we are working on tech issues behind the scenes while we're live. Man, we need a producer here to deal with this stuff and separate the producer and the host. But we are a one-man band here oftentimes in podcasting, so we do it all. Art direction, writing, hosting, audio production. That's us. All right, so I think the only rule here, I don't think there's any rules, first of all, much like podcasting, as Dave has discussed before in the past. And I don't know if there are any rules. We were going to bring in someone from the chat room. So ask your questions about podcasting. Bring up a topic you think is relevant to podcasting right now, or maybe it's an old topic that's still relevant today. And I will be searching through the chat, and hopefully your camera is ready and your microphone is ready, and we'll pull you in here. And it's going to be a little choppy here in live, but it should be a lot of fun, or a total flop. So we'll find out, but the key is to try it. Just like when you're adjusting something like an EQ or a compressor, you don't know where the good spot is until you pushed it too far. So that's what we're doing. We're pushing too far here on the roundtable. But let's meet the roundtablers. Let's start off on my left here with the co-host, Daniel. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitypodcast.com and mypodcastreviews.com.
All right. And next to him, Dave Jackson. Welcome back.
Nice to be here. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. Looking forward to this. This should be a lot of fun.
Wow, Dave, your audio is like really blown out, and it's weird. I don't know.
We can fix that.
There you go. Thank you. He's a pro. He works on the fly. All right, and first-time roundtabler, yeah, sort of that technicality once again. He was with us for the live recording at New Media Expo 2014. Right? Man, that was so early, it screws me up every time. I'm like, no, that had to be 2013. Here we are coming up on Podcast Movement. So, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Jeremy Chandonnet from who'sbehindthemic.com.
All right, and so we're gonna just leap off the edge here, and Jeremy's here because he's first up. He's batting first, right? He's a leadoff hitter, and he asked several questions in the lead up to our live show here. And the one I liked the best was, Jeremy, you asked, what is the biggest pain, maybe pain point, podcasters face today? And I would extend that to what is the biggest pain point for podcasters and podcast listeners, right? So we can take that wherever. Dave, actually, let me ask you, Jeremy, what were you thinking specifically when you asked that question?
Specifically, it depends on the day, but specifically at that moment, I was thinking how you get yourself out there, how do you get noticed, how do you advertise yourself, how do you get the people to come in and see you? How do you stand above the rest?
And what's your solution?
Me, social media.
Yeah, is that you find that the time spent on social media is actually translating into people finding your show? How do you even calculate that, right? How do you measure that?
I don't. Yeah, I'm still young in the podcasting community, so.
Awesome. So this is an interesting issue, right, Daniel? To know how much time we're spending on one platform, is it worth it? Is it translating into listeners for our podcast? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's hard to measure unless you get into technical things of like adding Google Analytics campaigns and tracking things, but still, it gets very technical when you talk about podcast downloads. I think the best thing to really see is look for a pattern. Like I've seen recently, I've been experimenting with publishing more content, having a weekly podcast episode like I always have done, and a weekly blog post and a weekly YouTube video, and that also goes in my separate video podcast. And so I'm doing something that should show me a change in the pattern. And then when I look at my analytics, I am seeing a change in the pattern. So that's the kind of thing I think you'd have to look for. I don't think you could actually get specific to know, yeah, I did this and I got 50 more listeners, unless people tell you that. But look for that pattern is, I think, the best that we can do for now.
We talk about word of mouth is highly important in podcasting, right? So we find that a lot of times people find a new podcast because someone told them. So do you guys think, Dave, do you think, I don't know how big Dave is on Twitter. He's more involved in Twitter than he used to be, but Dave, would a significant amount of retweets of an episode, would that tell you, hey, this is working, right? Because in theory, people are then spreading it via word of mouth.
Yeah, to me, that's an indicator that somebody liked this enough to want to share it with their audience. So to me, that's a pretty good indicator, as opposed to, you can see if they clicked on it. I guess that would be like 1 point where a retweet is worth like 2. And then nothing is when you see, wow, you sent this out to X amount of people and nobody clicked on it, nobody retweeted it, and you're like, okay, well, that was... and it's hard to say because, if somebody's not sitting in front of their phone or whatever, it could blow through their Twitter stream in, 10 seconds, so it's hard to judge.
Daniel, I think we just created a new service for you where you can score the social media metric, right? So someone retweets you get 2 points. We could gamify it too. Oh man, I gotta not put this isn't live, right? Because I gotta go hire an app developer for this app. ScoreYourPodcast.com. Dude, why am I giving out domains and everything?
That's right. Let me get on that. What's that?
I'm just gonna be taken by the time I'm off of this live broadcast. Good. I don't have time to create it. You guys know that. Everyone knows that. Hey, just one thing to mention. I think, I'm seeing a couple things come up in the chat, and I may just invite you. So hopefully you'll see it. I'm just going to go to the invite section here. And Michael Johnson, hang in there. If you're watching, I'm going to try to invite you, so pay attention for that. Maybe I will call people out, put them on deck, so to speak.
Yeah, Mr. Wilkerson was wondering that as well.
Okay, good. I'm glad you let us know, Dave.
Thank you.
All right, so as I go off and look for more people, Jeremy, what do you think? I mean, we'd only dealt with one small part of that, right? That was we sort of diverted off into social media and getting the word out. Jeremy, in terms of your question, what is the biggest hurdle or biggest pain point that podcasters are facing? Maybe what about podcast listeners? Do you think that there is something on the user side? So you consume podcasts. You said you're new in the sort of producing stage, but clearly you've consumed plenty of podcasts. Do you feel like there's any barriers there to, I don't know, finding new shows? Or I won't even want to lead the question at all. Any barriers for podcast listeners? Or what are the biggest pain points?
No, you were leading pretty good because that's what I had in my mind, was because of who's behind the mic. One of the reason that came about was because my pain point was trying to find shows that I needed to consume, and how do I pick those shows? I mean, you got new and noteworthy, but there's so many shows out there. I mean, how do you go through them? So I figured, well, why not give somebody a platform where they can talk about their show? You can hear the guest and the host and get them all together. So the pain point that I got through that from a listener point was just trying to find shows. And how do you find these shows? I mean, what do you know what what are you looking for? So
I'm not so sure that's a big pain point, though.
that was my pain point.
Yeah, and I think that for us who discover podcast and suddenly are excited by it, that could be a minor pain point, because to us, we're thinking, wow, podcasting seems amazing. I wonder if there's anything, how can I find something to listen to? But I think that's not the case for most people. Most people probably nowadays hear about a specific podcast or hear something that's a little bit more specific about just podcasts. And then it's an issue for them of, okay, how do I listen to that? And how do I subscribe to that? That's where having your own app, helps with that. But the workflow of installing a podcast app or anything like that is that barrier to entry. And I think that's the bigger problem for potential podcast listeners or viewers.
I think there's a little something there in terms of myself. I consume, or when I found podcasting, it was very easy, right? And I actually love the way iTunes did it. I've never seen anyone do it better in iTunes, where I search in iTunes for one thing, and then it shows me 5 shows that are like that show. Man, I would just subscribe to one after other. And I'm sure that's how I found most of the people I interact with today, including Dave. Who knows what I found first, but it probably said, hey, this person who listened to this also likes Dave, right, in School of Podcasting. So I checked it out, and that worked really well. I've hit a saturation point where it's really hard. I don't go in and search a keyword. I'm not really sure how I find new podcasts. It's only that word of mouth. Maybe somebody, or I heard it somewhere, right? Dave, how do you find a new podcast?
Somebody will say, like, I heard the phrase Radio Lab for like the 900th time, and I went, okay, Radio Lab, let's see what this is about. Because somebody said, oh, you're doing the Radio Lab thing where you interrupt your interviews. I'm like, I'm doing the what? They're like, yeah, did you rip that off from Radio Lab? I'm like, no, I just did it because I thought of something. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're just like Radio Lab. And I had no idea. And I'm like, all right, well. So I finally went over to check it out.
Yeah, so word of mouth. So a little plug here for Podcasters Roundtable. We did a show. It was a sort of a recreation of our new Media Expo talk where we talked about promoting your podcast. And we gave, if you go and look, it's podcastersroundtable.com/NMX14. And there's around 100 different ways to promote your podcast. And in that episode, or on that round, we talk a lot about, we go into depths about some of those that are on that list. And, if you look at the majority of them, they all seem to be word of mouth. They seem to all boil down to word of mouth methods. So it's very interesting to me. But yeah, I think, if Rob Walsh was here and we said the words podcast discovery, he might hit the roof, claiming there is no issue of discovery in podcasting. I heard a recent episode of The Feed, and I think maybe he defines it a little different. But podcast discovery. Let's just literally throw out those 2 words. Daniel, what do you think when I say that?
Discovering a new podcast to consume. That's what I think of, for podcast discovery.
And Dave, you giggled a little bit because we've heard Rob's been on the show before, and he talks. If you listen to some of his other stuff, and he says there is no discovery problem in podcasting, and this is because there's a lot of maybe blogs or podcasts that might say, hey, the problem with podcasting is discovering new content, right? And that's a problem. But Rob, can you clear up? I wish Rob was here. If he was in the chat room, he would pull him in for the open mic. But you giggled a little bit because you've heard that before, right?
Yeah, he's when Swell was still around, he would say it's really that's not the problem. That's not what people need. He said the reason that Stitcher is so popular is because they made it really easy to consume podcasts, and they do have kind of a hey, if you like this, you might like this. In there, but they just made it super easy to play and find. And really, in the end, it's like if somebody says, hey, I heard this thing about the Podcaster Studio. Okay, they type in Podcaster Studio, they hit search, there it is, and they hit play. Done. Because I think most of it comes back to word of mouth. And like you said, I don't know if anybody's going to iTunes. They will whenever the next version comes out, and they go, what is this podcast thing? That they just start typing it in. And maybe that's it, the person that goes, I have a WordPress podcast and I can't get above the WordPress podcast that's been dead for, 4 years. Well, it's because of the algorithm of Apple, but, on the other hand, if that information is still relevant and people are still listening to it, in theory it should go down if it's not. So that's the hard thing is, especially a lot of the older shows, because there weren't any competition, they have huge numbers of downloads. And so that has to be part of the algorithm because these old dead shows stay way up in the charts.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that people aren't still listening to that old stuff. I mean, there's
Right.
this old video podcast, I think, about podcasting. It has maybe around 10 or less episodes. It was very good. It looked like the production took a long time to put it together, and it always still ranks at the top, and it's been dead for almost as long as I've been podcasting, I feel like, and it's still up to the top because, you know, the search terms probably rank well. He probably has a lot of subscribers from the early days, right? Daniel, if you as part of the metric or the way that iTunes ranks you is based on your total number of subscribers, right? So, you know, there's all these elements that it's so funny because it sort of correlates with the topic that was in the G Plus community, the podcasters community. Go over there and get in that if you're not in it already, especially if you're watching this show. Of course, who else will be hearing that? But anyways, you know, someone was talking about they were frustrated by the new and noteworthy section or even a featured section where people are showing up there who are obviously not meeting the sort of spec you're supposed to meet to get into that section, right? So you're seeing generic like Libsyn cover art, right? So someone doesn't have cover art, so it's throwing up an image, and they're there. And we've heard before, no, you have to do these certain things to get featured, which is not true. You've seen podcasts that are there that technically shouldn't be there. So, you know, talk a little bit about that, Daniel, in terms of these old podcasts that are still sitting at the top and the way maybe iTunes determines that. And we don't have to discuss the second one. It's just it happens. People get ranked and they shouldn't be there.
Yeah, it's tough, especially if those podcasts are dead. That's where you can actually go and point that out to Apple and they can be removed. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if the podcast feed is dead, Apple will remove it eventually anyway. And maybe that's the result of someone reporting that the feed was dead. And by feed is dead, I mean you can't actually download the episodes. The RSS feed doesn't work anymore. That kind of thing, if that happens. But yeah, the algorithms, trying to game the system can be tricky, and it's not really that rewarding, I think. The best thing to do is really just keep doing what you're doing. Don't focus on trying to be featured in a certain list or fretting that you're not ranked above a certain other podcast, but just keep going, really. Don't give up.
Now I've got a question. It's new and noteworthy, right? They're two
Yes.
separate things. So are these podcasts that you're seeing with the plain backgrounds and the algorithms you're talking about, now is that podcasts that are just noteworthy and they've made their way up into the spotlight?
No, they're still new. It's
Okay.
Well, see, new and noteworthy is, yeah, it is two lists, a list of new podcasts as well as noteworthy podcasts. You don't have to be new in order to be in new and noteworthy. I've been in there a few times with old podcasts. But that's one algorithm, and that's based on stuff like ratings and reviews and new subscriptions, that kind of thing. But what people generally talk about is like if you search for tennis inside of iTunes, whose podcast will pop up first? And is it a podcast that's several years old, or is it a podcast that's more recent? That kind of thing is what people are talking about as a frustration, that they'll say, oh, you know, I enter tennis podcast and I show up as number 5 and all of the 4 other people ahead of me haven't podcasted in a year. That's the kind of thing they're talking about. And the search ranking is tricky to work with.
Yeah, I mean SEO, iTunes SEO, right? It's got its own SEO and it's a search engine. I mean, it is a search engine just for the walled garden of iTunes.
Yeah.
So,
Titles. It's all in the titles.
you know, that's what we hear. It's all in the titles. But so titles of episodes,
Yeah.
titles of your show. What about descriptions?
Descriptions contribute a little bit, but not nearly as much as the titles do. The titles matter the most. Keywords are completely irrelevant now. Categories, only your first category matters for how you show up in iTunes. The other categories don't really matter. And the iTunes spec has nothing about a limit of how many categories you can show in, but it just kind of, with its language, makes it seem like you should only really focus on one category.
Now wait a minute. We get the 3 categories typically when you use like a Libsyn or Blueberry or PowerPress. You get to enter yourself into 3 categories. Some people only use 1. They should use all 3, right? And are you saying we can add limitless categories? Maybe just manually put those on our feed? What are you talking about?
You could, yeah, theoretically.
Yeah.
Libsyn and PowerPress limit you to 3 categories. FeedBurner gives you 5 categories, but the actual specifications from iTunes say nothing about how many categories that you should have or what the limit is. So yes, you could be in more categories, but your listing in iTunes, if you look at the top of your listing, you'll see this breadcrumb view of where your podcast is in the directory. That is pulled from your first category, and that's what affects your ranking, is that you will rank inside of that category primarily, not the other ones.
All right. Well, the experiment has worked so far. We got Michael joining us. Well, Jeremy, you can stick around if you have something to add. And if we get too crowded, the first batter will sit on the bench. But we'll work on that. Michael, I don't know. Can you hear us? And
I can hear you. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
fantastic. I hear you. It's a little low, but I will work on that on my end. Unless you have a knob you can turn, that would be perfect.
How's that sound?
Perfect. Michael, so welcome to Podcasters Roundtable.
Cool. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm honored with this panel. Seriously.
Oh, no way. We're honored by you, man. It's awesome that you are here watching us. Please, that you spend any of your time to watch us talk about this stuff is great. So that's why the community rocks, because we get to exchange these fun conversations. Now, in the chat, you posted 3 different topics, and I was going to pick one here that I liked, and I think someone else actually mentioned they liked it too. And you said, when do we stop calling ourselves new media?
Yeah, exactly. I hear that thrown around so much, and I guess it prompted the thought of, when do we consider ourselves a mature industry? With as much advancement as there's been in this space between obviously technology and gear, and then obviously I think also we see the improvement in the content also increase over, if we take a yardstick, I guess, most of you guys I think have been doing this now for at least 10 years. I was doing streaming prior to, say, 2005, and from that time in the 90s to now, I've seen so much change in technology and how people are applying content and things like that. I just wondered, really, when do we kind of not put ourselves in a bumble and kind of consider either ourselves competing against mainstream or not, or do we not?
Yeah, I think what's also interesting is that new media functions kind of like the word podcast, and that one describes a delivery system, but also a content medium, right? So we call a show a podcast. We've had this discussion before about using the word podcast, but new media does define sort of a group of media types, right? So, YouTube or online video, internet radio, live broadcasting, what we're doing here is new media, and podcasting, of course, is new media. So, I don't know, Dave, what do you think of that?
That is interesting because we've been new for 9 years, at what point? But on the other hand, Tide comes out with a new, it's new fresh oak scent, and it's new and improved. So I don't know. I'm not sure if we'll always just be new media, because that's kind of what it is. Are we eventually just going to be media? And I don't know if new media is derogatory. Oh, well, you're part of new media.
Well, radio is still radio, right?
Right.
I mean, TV is still TV. You have to point to it some way. So, Michael, what are you thinking? What would be, I guess, the good question is, what would be the definer at that point, right?
Well, I guess for what I was thinking was generally bloggers have struggled with trying to be considered not only relevant, but I think taken serious, I guess is the best way I can put it. And do we suffer from that same kind of thing? And again, what are we using to compare ourselves to? Again, is it mainstream? Is it something else? But I'm just trying to figure out whether or not we should just either call ourselves media, or just simply an extension or another form of media. But I don't think we're new anymore. I guess maybe that's what I'm tripping on.
Michael, do you have a podcast?
I do. I have 2 right now.
And what
Actually,
do you call,
technically 3, but
what do you call that? Do you call it a podcast? Do you call it a webcast? What do you call yourself?
Sometimes it's interchangeable, but for the most part, I just use. I've been trying to follow the advice that many of you guys on this panel have given. I think for my music show, it's Indigenous Peoples Music. For we do a show on the paranormal, so that's paranormal investigations. If somebody asks to describe it further, then I might use the word podcast, but in many cases it's just show. So it's Indigenous Peoples Music Show, and the other one is I use show interchangeably really with any of them.
When do we break out of being a podcast? When we can be found somewhere you can't subscribe to and via RSS?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that podcast is a description for a specific distribution method. So
but we've agreed that it's also the medium, right, that we call it.
I haven't agreed.
Okay, well, good. We don't want anyone to agree on this show.
Well, Daniel, I know you said definitely that let's just call it a podcast, call it what it is, because that's the term that's been adopted, and part of me agrees with that wholeheartedly. But then I just think sometimes we get too broad when we call ourselves new media, and I guess I was just trying to find a happy medium somewhere. Maybe they don't relate, but.
It's hard to say, because if you look at radio was invented in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. So in that aspect, we're a blink of an eye in terms of how old we are. So it's hard to say when is do you have to be hundreds of years old before you're old media?
I had this conversation with Rick Calvert when Blog World renamed to New Media Expo, and I was a little bit critical on the name because I was bringing this up as well. This isn't really new anymore. Why call it New Media Expo? Because this technology has been around. It doesn't really need to be called new anymore. It's just, this is internet media. This is the way it is. And what he pointed out with this label New Media is that, at least for that conference, they want it to always be about the new media platforms available and new ways of communicating through social media, social networks, internet communication, all of this. And calling that new media does fit. But podcasting, it's Jim Collison pointed out in the chat room, using the word new is dangerous. Like, is New York really new anymore? Some things just inherit these titles. And I worked with a company before that called one of their books the New Book. And that was part of the title. It said new in the title. Then they made a sequel to the book. And the first version was a revision of an old book. Then the sequel was a completely new book, but it wasn't a replacement. Then they made another sequel and then another sequel. So it's still called The New and then the name of the book. But it's not... I hate relative terms like that when it's applying to something like this. It's just part of media, a new distribution method that we're using now.
The old kids on the block would agree with you. Isn't that what they have to call themselves now? No, that's...
I think in my case, I just describe myself as an internet broadcaster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
content producer.
What would you call? What would you call? What was your alternative to New Media Expo?
My alternative?
Yeah. Well, you didn't. You semi-critical. Didn't think we should have new. You just called the Media Expo.
I was just thinking Internet Media Expo or something like that. Media Expo.
Well, at some point, we won't even. There's another question. I guess at some point we transcend even the internet, right? Maybe some podcasts go to old media. There you go. I guess if we want to stop being new media, we have to stop bagging on old media, perhaps. But interesting question. Mike Wilkerson, you're on deck, buddy. So look for an invite. Let's continue the conversation. Jeremy, new media podcasting. What do you think of terms to define what I think a lot of people end up, I like to call it a show. I use it interchangeably. It is a show. It's pretty broad. It really covers everything. So any thoughts on this whole naming and what we call ourselves or our medium?
No, I like new media. I think is more of a kind of like the new digital type era over the old radio type era. So I think it's going to stay as a connotation, sort of. Maybe it'll phase out until we figure something out. But as far as the shows, I say show, and I'm a broadcaster, but I can't say internet because it may be Stitcher. It may be something else. I mean, we're moving into cars now shortly here, so I mean, it's a digital format, so I don't know, maybe digital media.
Well, internet is a big thing. It's not just World Wide Web, websites, podcasts, RSS. Internet is everything you get through the data connection, basically.
Okay.
And I think if you create content that really just blows your audience away, I don't think they're going to care what they call it. They're going to go tell their friend, I heard this, you got to hear this. And they're going to say, what is it? Well, it's new media, but it's old, but they're going to say, you got to hear this, go to this website and click play.
Yeah, well, that's all when I find a podcast that I like, I say, hey, go listen to this podcast or this show. So I think it's around show.
Michael, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I was just going to comment off of that. I agree with that, but also inevitably they also ask me, where did you hear about it? How did you hear about it? Where do I go? And, you know, fortunately, at least we can say a website, right? So, you know, most of us have, you know, the home for our shows are our websites, so we can at least point them in that direction. But I do think, you know, they do at least ask that, you know, where or how do I listen or watch your show?
Yeah, we had a discussion about this, and someone brought this up in the chat room even, on one of the Facebook groups, Podcast Community on Facebook. Today, someone asked the question, what's the best link to share for your latest episode? Would it be an iTunes link, a YouTube link, a direct link to the MP3, a link to your website, that kind of thing? And that's part of this complication, I think, of being in this industry, is that there are so many people with so many different devices that if you give an iTunes link, it might not work for a bunch of people, or people might not know what to do with it. But I think, kind of like what Michael was saying, pointing them to your website is probably the best place.
Yeah, I think that your whole website is a major hub for everything you've got, and you bring them to the one spot, and then you've got all these different options for them to choose from.
Wasn't that mildly debated recently? I think someone brought up a question in the community about maybe the efficacy of a website for a podcast. Might have been Colligan. Dan, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was Paul Colligan. He raised several good questions, and it's kind of cool that he, as one of the original podcasters, is getting back into podcasting and talking about it again and challenging some of the norms, which I think is really cool. But one of the things he did is he posted this list of points and questions, and one of them, and it was just to kind of stir some fire and see what some people thought, and one of them was something like, if your podcast has to have a website, then you're doing it wrong. And he was saying that to see what people thought and what they resonated most with, but that was something I very passionately disagreed.
What was the final result? Because I know he was looking for opinions, right? And I know that you offered some. I agreed. You wrote in there and you gave a sort of a laundry list of reasons why the website is so important, which I agreed with wholeheartedly. So did you listen to, I believe he put that on his show, the podcast report, did you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't remember, but it would be at thepodcastreport.com.
Cool.
Probably somewhere around episode 7, I think.
Cool. All right, well, here we go. Experiment moves on. We got Mike Wilkerson on the roundtable. Welcome, Mike.
Ray, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're excited. I know you've expressed interest on being on the roundtable, so it's so exciting to get you on here. So,
always, I love the diversity that our industry has. It has so many different people with so many different plans, with so many different technologies that are all looped into so many different things. And I don't know anything else that's like that inside of any other industry or old legacy media avenue. There is no such thing.
Cool. Now, your question or topic is detailed, so I guess I'll read it, and then we can go ahead and you can translate or tell us what you're thinking about. And it says, how many of you podcasters are planning/doing more than sitting and talking in front of a microphone and are creating a legacy? It says, you say you love storytelling and a skill set sharing element of podcasting, and it's perfect both for personal and business circles to leave something long after you're gone. And you asked for your thoughts, so I want your thoughts first and what you're thinking about that specifically in terms of a legacy, I guess.
Sure, I kind of look at it this way. Oh, thank you. I look at it this way. We all are sitting in front of microphones, bloviating is what I used inside of the other room.
Yes, I saw that. It was a good term.
But what is it that you're actually doing? Because if you want to listen to people bloviate, you can turn on a radio in any city, anywhere in the world, and listen to people bloviate. There's a difference between sitting and making stuff on a microphone and creating a legacy that becomes essentially an online library of learning and opinion. And the legacy portion is what really got me into podcasting. It's being able to have my daughter, who's now 11, but when I started podcasting, she was 1. And so now she can go back and she can listen to what her dad thought when he was that age way back then. And what I always tell people is, now imagine if you could do that with your parents or your grandfather or your insert important person. That spills over into industry as well, which is how I sell podcasts to companies. Those skill sets that people have, those storytelling elements that help prove that they are gurus, that they are people that are knowledgeable inside of their industries, it's infinitely more important for them to be able to convey that information so that people trust them and then make the step to buy services or information from them. And that long explanation that I've just given you is my definition of legacy via podcasting.
Daniel, you like the question, so what did it spark in your mind?
Well, just thinking about beyond the content for this week, making something that's timeless, making something that maybe a couple years from now you can still point people back to and say, hey, you want to know about this? Check out my episode number 3, and that still contains everything you need to know about this thing. And creating those resources that do turn you from being just a voice out there to being an authority and having a legacy around that and telling stories too. And like Mike said, it's really all about connecting with people, telling stories, making some kind of valuable content and effect on the world.
Dave, you have, and let me remind the roundtablers, it is your duty and your job to interrupt or bring up stuff. Don't wait for me to throw to you when you have a thought. Definitely jump in, because I know both you guys have plenty of thoughts. Dave, are you creating a legacy? You have over 300 episodes, this deep, rich library of podcasts, and that's just one show. That's the School of Podcasting. So maybe over 400. I don't know where you're at. It's just so high.
I'm at 420 something.
Yeah, I mean, Mike's. If that just brushed past you, he said when I started, my daughter was 1. Now she's 11. So he's been here since the beginning. If you didn't notice, that's awesome. Congrats on that. So Dave, what's your legacy that you're building the podcast?
Well, you hope my hope would be that people can listen to my stuff and walk away saving money, saving time. Some way that if they didn't listen to my show and I find them and they go, yeah, I bought this, whatever, Mackie VLZ 12, it's 16 channel board with 37 cents. I'm like, great, what are you going to do? I'm going to record Skype with another person. I'm like, what? You don't need that. So I hope that, it helps people, get the courage or even the audacity to use Daniel's phrase, right? The courage.
As he raises, I think he raised his Audacity cup just as you were saying that.
Yeah, to get up the courage to talk on a microphone, and it kind of becomes into different categories, because there are the people, I would love to leave a legacy that when I die, somebody goes, man, I'm glad that guy, I love to listen to his show. I want to be missed basically when I kick the bucket. But my mindset is always I want to make it better. I hope my 500th show is better than my 400th, better than my 300th. And I just found there's a Michael Hyatt's business partner wrote a book. His name's Ken Davis. It's Secrets of Dynamic Communication. And I've been talking in public for 20 years. I teach every day, and I'm already finding stuff there that I'm like, oh wow, this could really just razor sharp my content to where people should be able to listen, and it should just connect easier. And but then there is the person, right? There's the other side of that is, well, me and Skippy, dude, we've known him for each other, and we just hit the microphone, we crack some brewskis and get some pizza, and we just let her fly. And I'm like, there is that person that loves that, and they don't care if they leave a legacy. And I always say, and that's okay. But
I just know that those aren't the people that are scoring with some sort of either sponsorship or ability to make money with their podcast.
Yeah, but I think the cooler part about that and the tie-in with legacy is that now everybody has the opportunity to leave their mark, right? And I was just watching the Cosmos series, and they went back and they he talked about the first woman or the first person, which was a woman, credited with the written word, right? And so it was the first time in human history where mortality wasn't a way to, or dying wasn't a way to silence you, right? So you can actually leave your mark, and people through centuries, from here until forever, as long as it's available, which is another interesting topic, can see what you thought during that time, what you wrote, what times were like, and the same goes with the podcast. So the door is open for anyone to create that, whereas before you kind of knocked on someone's door, says, can I have a show, can I talk on the radio? They say no, go away, and that's it, right? I mean, there are things you could do, but not as powerful as a podcast, which is global and really can be reached by, not everyone, but a lot of people. Mike, it seems like you sparked a thought.
Yeah, and Ray, that's exactly what I'm talking about, when you can take that and then go monetize that to, in our case, a casino, because the casino is pouring money into all of the old legacy advertisement stuffs. But when they realize that a podcast will, 1, be around forever, 2, if we need to, we can go back in and alter commercials, 3, if we're going to tie in interviews with industry leaders inside of pokerdom, and then tie it to a casino or a property or an effort, the Heartland Poker Tour. Okay, well, that's another added element that you get with podcasting that you would never see inside of anything else that's old/legacy media. And that's why we've been bantering about new and old media. That's why I would stretch to keep the word new, so that there is that eye perk up or that head tilt inside of the conversation of selling a podcast, of taking that legacy, the ability to interview people, that knowledge base that you have in twoguystalkingpoker.com's experience and push, to someone that they do tilt their head and they do ask the questions and they say, well, why would I bother? And now you have something, and arm yourself with answers to those questions.
Mike keeps dropping like these little monetization nuggets, which I really, want to dive into, and people might be slaughtering me in the chat room being like, tell us what he means by that, but we might have to have Mike back on just to talk about that. But because it sounds like you mentioned selling podcasts, you mentioned advertisers monetization, but we won't go there right now because we want to get to a lot of other content, but
sure.
Make a special note of that. That sounds interesting.
Sure.
I was just going to, sorry.
You're up.
I was just going to say, in terms of legacy, I'll date myself here. My son is 18 years old. I just turned 50, and earlier I mentioned that I always consider myself an internet broadcaster, and I say that because I started with streaming long before we had any kind of audio on demand. And Mike, I think you and I are in a similar industry because my tribe owns a casino, Foxwoods Resort Casino here in Connecticut, and I understand exactly where you're coming from relevant to legacy equipment and older stuff, if you will. But it was interesting, relevant to my son, in that he asked me when did I start, quote, broadcasting, and I actually had to pull out DAT tapes because all of my early shows were I couldn't afford hard drives back in the earlier days, if you will, to store all of my media on there. So I actually had to store them on DAT tapes, and I was like, oh my God, I got to crack out the gear and play him something because it was the only way I could actually play it back for him. And he listened to like a couple episodes and he goes, "You're old," because I sound completely different now than I did, in say 1992. So it was kind of interesting. But you're right in that I have tapes, that are stored away, and in essence, to some degree, that's my legacy. I can give those to my son and say, because he's following a similar path. He likes media. He's going to school down in Florida at Full Sail. And, I couldn't be more proud of him. But, we all start somewhere, and at least I can help him a little bit along the way. So,
anyway, I love that you're talking about legacy. The other element I would also tell people about is that inside of your program, there should always be at least one light bulb moment. It doesn't have to always be some gigantic, life-altering light bulb moment. But what I find inside of Two Guys Talking podcasting across the spectrum is that there's this chemistry set. We're all kind of pouring in chemicals and opinion, and then I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah. And then we take the interaction of the listeners and an all-fan input episode at the end of the season, and suddenly you start creating things that not only allow you to create your legacy and put something online that people can learn from you, but you as the podcaster actually end up learning something as well. That's why I have been podcasting so long and in so many avenues, because that's what I get from podcasting.
Yeah, cool. And let me just say, Laura Williams, you're on deck. I'm going to try to send you an invite, so get ready for that. I got to get some female power in here. My gosh, people ask me all the time, "Do you ever have women on?" I say, "I try. We have. If I go and count it up, it's been 5 or 6. So it's probably been a while. And I do have talked about the all-female roundtable that I want to do, and it's hard to organize. And I haven't found a dress yet. So I gotta have something.
They did start the first
to wear to the
written
show.
word after all. They started the first written word after all.
There you go. All right, credit for the first written word. That's very cool. Related to this issue of legacy, and I hinted at this. I've often asked, maybe on Twitter or something, or even thought about, what happens to your podcast after you, Dave said, kick the bucket, after you pass away, after you die, after you whatever other words are to or metaphors are for dying. What happens, right? What do you do? Do you will it to somebody? Because once it's gone, like Daniel, like you said, if it's not in the feed and can't be downloaded, it's gonna maybe start getting taken off different places, right? So if it's not available, and I like to tell people even having your archive on archive.org might be a really good idea. But even in that case, if it's not a link in your website, and if you don't pay for your website, so there's all these issues, right? So when you go, your podcast in theory could go with you. So that could affect your legacy.
You have to start a foundation, the Dave Jackson Foundation, that people can contribute to keep the show going.
There's a lawyer that we're working with, and actually hosting and domain name registration is actually a piece of my will, and he's going to be talking about that in the coming weeks as we start up Two Guys Talking Cars is what's coming up, and we're going to be talking about cars and how you will cars. That's going to be a piece of that.
I'm leaving you the school of podcasting, Ray, just so you know.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, but I don't know if we're so far apart. Dave, I don't get an episode out every week. You don't want to leave it to me. I'm not going to be able to get your show out every week. I can archive. Ooh, I get all that Google juice. Oh, yeah, I'll take it, Dave. Yeah. I'll take it. But, hey, on a serious note, have you guys thought about that? Daniel, what are you going to do? It's morbid, right? You don't want to think about it. But just as a thought experiment, what are there anything we can do? I say archive.org, but of course then the only place to find it really will be archive.org. But at least it's still out there.
See, it's more than just having your media somewhere, because that media won't be downloadable through the RSS feed. So, and I've been thinking about this because my wife, I don't know, maybe I should be concerned about this, but my wife asked me to prepare a document for what she should do if I die.
There you go, yeah.
And I don't know what's going to happen once I finish that document. But one of the things I've been thinking of is putting like Dave Jackson's phone number on there and saying, pay Dave Jackson this much, have him do this to my podcast so that it stays online for the rest of forever and whatever thing, keep paying these bills. Something like that. But because you can't just have, at least right now, you can't just have a death switch where, like, if you don't press a button every 108 minutes, then your podcast switches over RSS feeds and switches to archive.org and something like that. You have to have someone manually switch all of this stuff over for you. There are automated scripts that can speed up the process, but you still have to do something. So you really have to have someone listed who would have those technical skills. And so I'm building a list of, if you need help with the technical stuff after I die, talk to these people, have them do these things for you.
Surprise, Dave.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I've thought about that. I should leave it is weird because if you put all that information on a piece of paper, here's my PayPal, here's my password, here's my other PayPal, here's my other password, here's my bank stuff. It's like, and next thing you know, it's like, here, honey, have more Cheerios. Why are these purple? It's like, that's kind of weird. You never know.
Oh, all right. Well, that's a fun thought experiment. You guys can bring that up in the chat room. What are you going to do when you die on your podcast, right? But it is an interesting question. It goes to your legacy, because legacy implies that it's kind of after you're gone, maybe, or at least when you're far removed from it. And if we can't find it, so much for that legacy. But it is the internet. Nothing is, in theory, ever lost once you put it on the internet. So pay attention to that. Facebookers who want to post pictures that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
All right, Laura, welcome to the Roundtable.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Female power, right in the middle.
For woman power, absolutely. Fist bump, for sure.
So you asked a question. It says, and I'll just read it again. It's a little long here. So it says, "I'm a podcasting newbie. Welcome. My show is The Writing Biz on iTunes and Stitcher." I'm assuming that's not in the title. The on iTunes and Stitcher.
No.
Right. Okay. Just making sure. It could be. You can title anything you want. He says, "Here are my questions. What were the biggest marketing mistakes that you made with your podcast? How did you overcome them? And what one thing brought you the biggest boost in your audience numbers?" So this is a popular topic. People always want to know how to grow my show. I mean, we don't often start a podcast so that our buddies and family can only listen, right? We hope that more people tune in. We are maybe creating some type of legacy, and we want to share that with other people. So, oh man, who should we throw this to? Well, I guess you're a podcasting newbie. Have you had a chance to make any new mistakes or mistakes?
Well, I have that's one of the things I've kind of just been sitting on it. I started as an HOA in Google Plus, and then I release it, the audio through the other iTunes and Stitcher Radio, and it's going real well on Google Plus, and also I'm getting traction on Twitter, particularly with the writers and things like that. But I wanted to take it to the next level, but I'm trying to avoid making the mistakes in the first place.
I think Dave might have
a lot of research. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of research. And Dave, we know what this phenomena is, right? A lot of research, a lot of fear, no show, right? Dave might have some good advice about, I would tell you to just start, but Dave probably has some more sage advice.
Yeah, I guess one of the things to me that I see people do is they get worried about, they start picking the microphone, they start worrying about what WordPress theme to get, and then should we go with Aweber or MailChimp? And maybe I should, what kind of background should I get from my video? What kind of camera? And I'm like, great, what's your podcast about? And they go, I haven't figured that out yet. And
what's it called?
So to me, if you're starting out, like I've been telling people this, like write down, not like word for word, but write down 10 ideas for your first 10 episodes. It's something Daniel did when he started the Audacity to podcast, and I think you said you still have things on that list because you've been adding to it. Because if you don't have content, it doesn't matter if you're using Twitter or Facebook or Pinterest because there's no content. So I think that would be the thing. What's Derek Halpern's thing? Is it promote 80% of the time and make content 20% of the time, and then as your audience gets bigger, you swap it. You start. I forget what that goes.
Yeah, something like that. But that's also highly contested on if you listen to the podcast.
That's not really what my problem is. I mean, I have the website for it. I have the content. I have the shows planned out. I'm getting excellent guests. Like this week, I have Stefan Hovnanian on for a series I'm doing on social media. That's not really the problem. The problem is I don't really know how to do it outside of what I'm doing. I mean, how do you get the big numbers? And because eventually I would like to get sponsors. That's what my problem is. Everything's in place to. I don't have any problem, with people seeing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. It's just actually getting that traction. I'm just not quite. I know that I need to put it into more directories. I know that for sure.
Is your podcast on iTunes?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a podcast. You want to grow it, and it may be a little cart before the horse, right, Dave? I mean, it's really just create that amazing content, drill away. It's going to be a lot. There's this concern over massive numbers, which in podcasting we know you don't necessarily need massive numbers to get that sort of sponsorship goal, but it is still a large threshold. It could be 1,000, 5,000, right? Somewhere in there I think is a really good number, and I think Todd Cochran mentioned something on this. I asked him a little bit more about it on the communities, and he, I don't remember specifically, but it was in that few thousand range before you start, being serious about thinking about chasing a sponsor. But, Laura, it just sounds like you want to learn just how to build it up, because past of what you've already done, you've had success on Google Plus and Twitter.
Right.
I would suggest two things on this. One is you really, like we were talking about earlier, the best way people discover new podcasts to listen to is word of mouth. So you need to try and find some way to get someone else to talk about you. Maybe like join a podcasters roundtable. Oh wait, check that one off. And, but get someone else talking about you in some way. That could be try to get interviewed on someone else's podcast, interview someone on your podcast, and provide them with tools to then promote the links. Create great content that mentions someone else and send it to them as a courtesy just to let them know, hey, I talked about you in this and your thing here, thought you might want to check it out. If you'd like to share it, here's how you could do that. That's one way. Just word of mouth in some way. Get someone else, preferably with a big audience, talking about you. The other thing is, and this sounds so marketing-like, and it sounds almost like, oh, that's dirty, but I'm finding it's really true, is try to build an email list. Like I'm looking right now at my Google Analytics for the audacitytopodcast.com, and I see that in the last 30 days, I've had 22,000 people visit my website. Now, that's nothing, that's unique visitors. I don't have 22,000 on anything of mine. Not 22,000 email subscribers, podcast subscribers, downloads per episode, nothing like that is 22,000. And it's so much easier for people to subscribe to an email list if they know they're going to get value than it is to subscribe to a podcast. If you can connect with them in that way, you're reducing the barrier to entry. And then for every new podcast episode, you send out an email, and this could be automated. You send out an email that lets them know what the episode is about, gives them a little preview, and then links them to the place where they can listen to it or even subscribe, tell them how to subscribe. So it's like building a connection with an audience one step at a time instead of 10 steps at a time. Like, hey, check out my website and subscribe to my podcast. Right. You're working with what they know, and then that email list can actually become more valuable to you than a podcast sponsor.
Yeah, I just started doing that because what I'm doing is a once-a-week newsletter, and what I put in it is the blog post that I write that has the video for the show itself. It has the podcast links. It has all the resources and links that we mentioned. And then it also has any blog post. I try to write a blog post separate from the whole show about that subject earlier in the week to drive traffic to the show. And then I go in and add even more resources into the newsletter that aren't mentioned in anything else. So I'm working on that piece. But I think that it's just the niche that I'm getting into is not just writers, but writers who are trying to build their business. So it's even more narrowed down. So I don't expect huge amounts of traffic, but I'm trying to just get what I'm doing out to the right people that are interested in it. So
how new is your podcast?
I'm so sorry. The writing biz.
How new is it?
6 weeks.
Okay.
Well, 8 weeks.
Yeah.
8, no.
And that's kind of where I was. That's kind of where I was hoping to chime in, was that one of the things that we all have to remember as podcasters is that it's wonderful that you've been podcasting that long, but just realize that the reason I love to revert to the word legacy is that it really is time.
So it's the body of work.
There's no doubt about it. Creating a library, the library of your podcasting, at least in my opinion, and the ones that we throw on the network, is that is your money. That is your resource that you then get to have in your hands and covet and convey to people. And that's how they learn about you. And then, as Daniel said, those people will tell other people to refer to you. And that's when people start writing articles about you, or you jump onto their podcast, or you connect with one sponsor that has an audience of people that then become curious about you. The want for there to be some magical elixir potion thing that we dump on you, the new podcaster, it unfortunately just doesn't exist. But creating that library is a no-lose situation for everybody. If you're creating engaging podcast content regularly, if you're exposing people with stuff that they maybe can't get somewhere else, or you become a source for people that write. Songwriters are another one that I think it's incredibly valuable because, yes, they're songwriters, but there's something to being a songwriter rather than just playing music, and a lot of people don't know that. And so being able to focus and dig down like you are, I love stuff like that because the digging down part is what people are looking for. You can go and listen to, I don't know, a podcast about podcasts anywhere, right, Daniel?
Huh?
Right.
But But being able to dig down and find those little post holes that have the really deep, rich content that's focusing on something, that's where you're going to find some really great nuggets that you then want to share, and then those people are spilled, and it's a big cycle.
Right. And you got to remember things like Rush Limbaugh. It took him 4 years to get syndicated. It took 5 years for Howard Stern. It took 4 years for Seinfeld to make it to #1. It took 7 years for the Beatles to make their first #1 hit, and it took 13 years for Rodney Dangerfield's his career to peak. So I always say bring your passion and a bag full of patience.
I think too, for Laura, I was going to say that I think that maybe sponsorship might not be your revenue model. I mean, it sounds like you're catering to a specific niche, or you're trying to help them do something. It sounds more like a information product or something might be much more lucrative when you have that small focused audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, my revenue model really isn't about the podcast so much. Really, this is what it is, and you're going to think I might be kind of crazy, is that I'm planning on doing a book on the writing business it wouldn't be published till the first of the year. So I'm using the shows to give myself a reason to develop all that research and content to put into the book. So really that's where the money is. It's not in the podcast itself or in the hangout on air.
Right, but it is. I mean, it's a promotion tool, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's a value add.
And my business
with respect, it's a great value add that not only. Remember, I do not like to read. We even have a podcast that contrasts books versus movies, and the reason is because when I was a kid, I could not stand reading. Hey, read this book. No,
let me guess. It's called Two Guys Talking About Not Liking to Read.
No, it's actually called The Versus Machine.
Darn.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, the gist though is that again, being able to dig down, have something specific that is a value add that isn't a book, will also get you lots and lots of people. And this new media thing, it's not new. It's exposure, and you will always win with exposure.
Just real quick for a public service announcement, we talk about a lot of links on this round or this show all the time. Always want to check the chat because people are constantly putting links. Daniel put a link to something we talked about. One podcast episode, David put a link to a book. I never call him David. I saw it written out. I meant Dave. But so lots of links. So if you're listening to the audio-only version, I try to get the links in the show notes, but the event page, which you can always get to. That's quick. You can always get there through the website, Podcaster Roundtable. Check that out because I know we talk about a lot of links, and a lot of times the chat room is so awesome that they show up there. So I think, Laura, you were going to say something.
No, all I was going to say is that my business actually is content writing, marketing, and I also do social media for clients. So the whole writing biz was another part of that. In other words, just show that I do know what I'm doing. That I can do, Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So it's all kind of, it is money making, but it's not necessarily sponsorship money making is what I was getting at.
Well, a podcast oftentimes is sort of proof that you know what you're talking about or know what you're doing. It's at least one way to podcast, which is, and even if you don't know as much in the beginning, you're going to learn by doing a podcast because you're going to have other people. Speaking of legacy, like my daughter can go back and look at herself on the Hangout. So, anyways, I forgot what I was saying, but you get the point.
You are absolutely right. I really appreciate you guys talking to me because that's kind of the direction I was thinking. But to hear it from people who have been there and done that, it really is affirming. I appreciate it.
You're another aspect of what I love about podcasting. There's no doubt about it. It's great stuff.
How else are you guys getting or generating your email list? Because I have yet to start one, and basically I really don't know where to start. I mean, obviously I have a contact form on my website, but obviously that's clearly not enough, and most people aren't using that anyway. So when we're talking about list building, I have no idea where to start.
All right. Well, as you can see, I've turned into a pumpkin. It is family time, and actually, I'm flirting with danger here. I've got about 8 minutes left on the recorder. So both reasons to cut this short. We made it one shy, and actually I don't see Dave. I'm not sure he went. We made it one shy of the max. I think the max is 10, not 9, right, Daniel?
10.
We can do 10. So we made it 1.
10,
So a
right.
good reason to have another open mic is to hit the max. And, I thought maybe we would send people out as new people came in, but it was great to have it this way. We worked in more people than I even think got a chance that I thought we would get a chance to get to. So it's been a lot of fun. I want to thank everybody. I will do really quick because we are flirting with danger here. The recorder's going.
Hey, one thing before we
Yep.
close, just to quickly answer the question that Michael had about email lists, is look at michaelhyatt.com. He has somewhere on his site something about making and building an email list. So does rayedwards.com. Both of them have some great tips on building an email list.
Cool,
Thank
and
you.
I agree. You should start. I started mine too late, but it's never too late, so go ahead and start that.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Well, Dave is jumping in just in time to say goodbye. So, again, your name and your website where your podcast is, and I will thank you for being on another round, Daniel.
I'm Daniel J. Lewis. Check out my latest product for podcasters at mypodcastreviews.com and follow me on Twitter at @TheRamenNoodle.
Awesome. Dave, welcome back, and we'll say goodbye.
Dave Jackson, find me at schoolofpodcasting.com.
All right, JC. Thanks.
Jeremy Chandonnet, JC. You can find me at who'sbehindthemic.com.
Awesome. And Laura, thank you so much for coming on and joining us here in the chat as well as being on the round.
Yep. And it's Laura Williams, thewritingbiz.com, and it's to help writers manage and grow their businesses.
Very cool. Michael, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's Michael Johnson, and my show is Indigenous People's Music at ipmshow.com. Thanks.
Cool. Mike?
Mike Wilkerson from the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network. That's the number 2guystalking.com.
And that answers a question. Can you put a number in your domain? There you go. Mike just answered it for you. So very cool. All right. You guys got to go to podcastersroundtable.com to get the show notes for this one, as well as subscribe, of course, with your chosen method of consumption. Hopefully it's there. If it's not, let me know if we're not on the platform that you subscribe to, and we will get there. And, of course, if you're in any one of these and they have a ratings and review, thumbs up, star, nice word, always helps push us up, hopefully, in the rankings, so more people discover Podcasters Roundtable. So, all right, until the next round, that is it. We'll have a good time. We're going to be out at a conference. Hopefully we'll see some of you at Podcast Movement. I think there will be another one next year as well, so that's a new podcast conference to have on your radar where we can take the next step in getting to know each other. Here we're doing a little face-to-face, but then we can actually shake hands, so that's a lot of fun. But not to worry, I think a lot of us are going to share the content that we're sharing there, so you won't miss out on too much. Okay, we will see you next time, and wave, everybody.
All right.